On the western side of Sutton Park, separated by little more than a mile of heathland, woodland and old park roads, two natural springs rise from the ground. They are known locally as Rowton's Well and Keeper's Well, although neither is really a well in the conventional sense. There were not shafts dug to reach water hidden far below the surface. The water emerges naturally, and at some point people enclosed each spring within a circular stone basin. Today these structures can seem like minor, easily overlooked features, but together they preserve a story stretching from the prehistoric landscape of Sutton Park to its medieval keepers, Victorian visitors and eventual transformation into a public place of recreation. People were present in this landscape thousands of years before either spring appeared by name in a written record. Flint objects have been found in the vicinity of Rowton's Well, some of them recovered during peat cutting in the 20th century. In the 18th century, workers digging peat in the Longmoor Valley also reported finding working timbers buried in the wet ground. It has been suggested that these timbers could have formed part of a prehistoric trackway laid across the valley, although they were never scientifically dated and their original purpose remains uncertain. The discoveries show that people used this landscape in the distant past, but they don't prove that Rowton's Well was enclosed or regarded as sacred during prehistoric times. There's a similar need for caution when considering the Roman period. Icknold Street, also known as Rowton Street, passes through the western side of Sutton Park, and it is a genuine Roman road. Its raised course and flanked ditches can still be traced across parts of the heath. A possible temporary Roman camp has also been suggested near Rowton Hill. The spring would have existed in some form and travellers may have used it, but no archaeological evidence proves that the Romans constructed Rowton's Well or gave it a particular significance. The road is Roman, but the connection between the Romans and the well remains a possibility rather than an established fact. Keeper's Well belongs more clearly to the park's medieval story. Sutton Park developed a royal chase and was enclosed as a deer park during the Middle Ages. Its landscape was carefully managed, divided by banks and ditches and supervised by officials responsible for deer, timber, grazing and access. Keeper's Pool, which is fed by Keeper's Well, was probably created as a fish pond in the 15th century. Tradition associates its construction with John Holt, keeper of Sutton Chase during the reign of Henry VI, although the pool itself may be older. Historic England has suggested that the nearby spring could mark the site of a late medieval keeper's lodge. This has not been conclusively proved, but it provides the most convincing explanation for the names of both the well and the pool. By the 18th century, the springs were part of a landscape in which water supported several different activities. Keeper's Well fed Keeper's Pool and the stream system that runs through the eastern side of the park. Rowton's Well drained towards Longmoor Brook and Longmoor Pool, which had been dammed in 1733 to serve a mill. The pools of Sutton Park were not originally created simply as a picturesque lake. Some began as fish ponds, while others stored and controlled water for mills, engaged in grinding corn or producing metal goods. The quiet springs at the head of the streams therefore belong to a much larger working system. Rowton's Well first emerges clearly from the documentary record during this period. A history published in 1762 calls it Rowton's Well with an N in the middle, while a detailed survey of Sutton Park made in 1779 marks both Rowton's Well and Rowton's Well Bank. The same map shows the peat workings in the Longmoor Valley nearby. This is important because it establishes that the name was already attached to the spring and surrounding landscape long before the keeper's cottage was later built on the hill. The origin of the name itself remains uncertain. Antiquarians proposed a connection with a medieval family called Rowton, while others suggested that it derived from Holy Rood and preserved the memory of an early Christian holy well. Neither explanation has been proved, and there's no surviving medical record of a chapel or formal religious dedication at the spring. In 1815, both Rowton's Well and Keeper's Well were enclosed. The surviving circular stonework is generally attributed to this period, although the springs themselves were already old features of the park. Enclosing them made the water easier to approach, collect and use for bathing. At Keeper's Well, the water rose within the circular wall and overflowed towards the pool. At Rowton's, the enclosure created a broad bathing basin, in which visitors could immerse themselves in the cold spring water. Further changes followed in the 1820s. After a long legal dispute concerning the finances of Sutton's old corporation, a court of chancery scheme authorised the construction of two cottages for assistant park keepers. One was built on Rowton's bank above the well, and in 1828 Joseph Nash became the first recorded occupant. The cottage had a small area of land attached to it, and later visitors could stop there for fresh milk supplied by the keeper's family. The building became known as Rowton's Cottage, but it took its name from the oldest spring rather than the other way round. By the early 19th century, Rowton's had also developed a widespread reputation as a healing well. In 1841, Charles Barker, the headmaster of Bishop VV's grammar school, wrote a humorous well about the annual crowds who came to the spring, washed in its water and left their names behind. 14 years later, Zach Twomley described the well in his history of Sutton Coldfield. He recorded that working mechanics travelled from Walsall, West Bromwich and surrounding smoky countries to bathe there, particularly when suffering from what he called scobutic eruptions, an old medical expression applied to certain skin complaints. For these visitors, the journey to Rowton's offered more than a supposed cure. They were leaving industrial towns dominated by smoke, dust and furnaces, even crowded houses, and entering a large expanse of open heath and woodland. Some arrived in wagon loads and walked into the park from its western gates. Bathing in the clear spring water formed part of a larger day of recreation, fresh air and temporary escape from the black country. Victorian accounts even record that a warning flag was flown when women were bathing, instructing men to keep the distance. Keeper's Well was also used for bathing, but it never acquired the same regional fame. Twomley described it as a bathing spring that principally fed Keeper's Pool. When Eliza Edwards visited while preparing his guide to Sutton Coldfield, published in 1880, he found the spring protected by a small fenced enclosure. He described clear water rising within its circular wall and estimated that it overflowed at a rate of between 20 and 30 gallons a minute. Rowton's reputation continued to grow during the Victorian period. An 1869 guide described its water as exceptionally cold and bracing, and recommended it for eye complaints, like pretty much every other well that I've ever heard of. Local histories record that water from the spring was collected for use at Birmingham Eye Hospital, where it was believed to have beneficial properties. The precise frequency and duration of these deliveries are difficult to verify, but the tradition reflects the seriousness with which the water's supposed medicinal qualities were once regarded. There's no modern evidence that it cured either skin disease or problems of the eye, and the apparent benefits may have owed as much to washing, cold water and relief from polluted surroundings as to any special mineral composition. The arrival of the railway from Birmingham in 1862 encouraged even greater numbers of visitors to Sutton. For a brief period, businessmen imagined that the town might develop into a spa resort comparable with Leamington or Buxton, with Rowton's Well providing the natural spring water. A Grand Royal Hotel was built near Sutton Station, but the company behind it soon ran into serious financial difficulty and entered compulsory liquidation in 1865. Sutton never became the fashionable spa its promoters had envisaged, although the park continued to attract thousands of day trippers. By the end of the 19th century, the landscape around both springs was changing again. Keeper's Pool returned to the ownership of Sutton's Corporation in 1879, and an open-air bathing pool was later developed on its northern side. Rowton's Cottage was still shown on the map in 1887, but it was probably demolished not long afterwards, still flowing below the bank that retained the Rowton name. What survives today is therefore not simply a pair of old stone circles. Rowton's Well preserves the history of people who travelled out of the industrial towns to seek cleanliness, health and open air, while Keeper's Well recalls the older organisation of the deer park and the management of its fish ponds, streams and keepers. Around Rowton, stories of prehistoric travellers, Roman soldiers and holy wells accumulated because the springs seemed ancient and mysterious. Around Keepers, the associations were more practical, rooted in the everyday administration of the park. The two springs are close together, and the water rises from the same broad landscape, but people gave them different meanings. One became celebrated as a source of healing, and almost turned Sutton into a spa. The other quietly supplied the medieval pool, and carried the name of those responsible for protecting and managing the park. Taken together, Rowton's Well and Keeper's Well reveal how natural water could become medicine, livelihood, recreation and legend, leaving its mark on Sutton Park long after many of the people and buildings connected with it had disappeared.